Alright, good evening everyone. Welcome to another 2MK stream. Today we are doing Street Fighter content, our usual disc guidance. And we will be reviewing the completed Kata 32. This kata is basically a continuation or a level up, depending on how you want to look at it, of the one we gave before, Kata 31. Kata 31 is about whiff punishing, spacing yourself correctly for certain anti-airs, and for shifting your perspective on how matchups work against certain types of characters, specifically grapplers that stay at a certain range. Today, therefore, we are moving from Zangief, who is generally not mobile, relatively slow by most standards, to Rainbow Mika. Our basic demonstration of this character involves almost exactly the same aim and flow. Generally, you want to do something. In this case, it will not necessarily be a dash because of how Mika is, but you want to do something to attack her from about a dash spacing range away. And generally after that, you want to backdash and whiff punish whatever she does. Now this works quite well even if you turn on all of the inputs, but not all of them are actually required, and you can slow this down somewhat by turning off certain of them. So this does use the standard MikaBot. It can use more simplified versions if you need it because of the things that are required in the flow to make the kata work, not being the same as the specifics of the bot itself. If you look on our bots page, you will get all of the information on how you're supposed to play against the bot. But the kata's goal is generally a bit different. So let's briefly review some of the inputs, even though you should probably get them more so from the bot page. I'll just explain why they're important to the kata rather than specifically what they are. So let's look at just action 1. Action 1 is basically intended to give Mika two things: a jump and an activation of her V skill. You will not in fact see this happen most of the time, the V skill part that is. And as you can see, even though it hits all 4 buttons at once, it tends to throw. Has to do with the priority system of the buttons themselves. So the main thing you need to understand about this input is that it's meant to give a throw and a jump, and if you poke at her, she might do that. EX command grab. And if you poke at her in a different way, she might happen to activate her V-trigger. Sorry, V-skill. She also activates her V-trigger, but that's a different situation altogether. So you can see why this is important, but it doesn't really do anything with punishing. She'll just jump at you constantly, and you basically have to anti-air her all the time. So obviously, even a kata that is meant to help you train anti-airs as well, there has to be something to be the first part. So we're going on to action 2. The main purpose of action 2 is to give her a combo. It's not really necessary for working with the kata. It helps a little bit because it keeps you on your toes, but you could have action 2 off and probably be fine. She also will sometimes use it to whiff punish you when you do things wrong, but again, you could probably do without it. If you just want a little bit more focus in the kata, you probably won't have any issues. Action 3, on the other hand, Action 3 does a lot of little things. And most of these little things move Mika forward or hit you with a low. She also obviously has the V skill in there, but you can see most importantly that she keeps on moving forward with her normals. And this is important to the kata because it causes her to change her spacing, whereas Zangief, for the most part, if Zangief was changing his spacing, you knew that you needed to stay out of his way in some way. For Mika, you can note that she will be moving forward, but you can't absolutely be sure which way she will move forward. This is important. On to action 4. Once again, action 4 basically is about hitting buttons in neutral and moving forward. They're relatively powerful buttons. It does have the ability to activate V-trigger, and it does have a couple other little things like the medium kick at the end and so on. This is relatively hard to input, but if you're missing parts of it, it's not going to affect the kata too much. The bot is affected because the bot is trying to make you uncomfortable and move certain loops in certain situations, but the kata doesn't care. So it's likely that we will give you a clearer idea of how precise it needs to be for the kata on the kata page. But if you already have the bot, even if you don't have a perfect version of it input for the bot, you probably will be fine because the main things that it's supposed to do are relatively easy to time off, and it's the little underlying behind stuff that's a little harder to get. So this does tend to need to be on, but it's not one of the more important ones. If you turn this off because she's moving too much or it doesn't suit your character somehow, it doesn't tend to break the kata entirely. You do need to turn it back on eventually, but you could do a lot of the practice without that. You will see also that she jumps a little bit in this one. It has a lot more to do with her rhythm, and the rhythm part is the part that makes it important. So finally, action 5. Action 5 is even more inputs, but it's also less necessary for the bot most of the time. It depends on how much you need to be able to punish moving forward stuff. This is not super important to the bot. If your character has a parry on the other hand, and you want to learn to either parry or deal with Mika's drop kick in some specific way, we do suggest having this on. But the absolute base of the kata can be done with just actions 1 and 3 mostly. So let's turn those on and demonstrate that very first version. We're not necessarily suggesting that you use this to train, but it just helps you get an idea of how she moves. And if you're not familiar enough with the character, it's better not to go straight into it. So you're looking at the fact that she will whiff moves that bring her forward and occasionally jump. This means that her jump spacing will constantly change. Fortunately, neither of those moves is very fast. You can, for example, dash in on reaction to seeing her hit her heavy punch. She may not be able to do much against you if you just dash in and jab, or sometimes even dash in and hit a medium button. Similarly, for when she uses her V skill, you can dash on that almost all the time. So you can test your ability to dash in after she does a certain set of things, and you realize that she also has the crouching light kick to punish you when you're a little slow. Now this is generally hard to do at first, especially since you have to go into the thing that you were trying to do on Zangief but did not prioritize. Namely, the very last part of the Zangief kata. If you were feeling comfortable with the Zangief kata, then you are probably going to be fine with this. You are confirming your dash up button when you see it hit her armor. Usually you're trying to do this with a move that is either invincible or takes you off the ground a little bit or something. You just want to make sure that it cancels really fast and that you don't get hit by Mike just by her dropping it. Generally, she is intended to give you this uncomfortable feeling of someone or something constantly moving forward toward you. And of course you are trying to split your focus between dashing forward and anti-airing, which is relatively difficult because the two mindsets are different. One is offensive and one is defensive. As you can see, it is generally quite hard to get in on her on reaction to seeing the mic and still land something. It's possible. I can basically assure you that it is possible with almost all characters. Your dash has to be 19 frames or slower for this to not work. But most characters with relatively fast dashes can do this. Of course, note that again, we're not really trying to specifically make you do that. If you have another option with your character that will reach from that range, especially if it's a multi-hit move. There are a few moves like that. As long as you can do that move or anti-air, you are probably doing the right thing. Because that is the key to what you need to be able to do in neutral. To be able to react to your opponent doing things in neutral that you could punish them with in some way, while still being ready if they decided to jump at you. This works particularly well if you have ways of making sure that you are at the right spacing and your opponent does not have as many good quick buttons. And this is actually relatively common for the grapplers in the game, which is why they're the choice for this kata. You can also figure out whether or not you are very twitchy as a person simply by how often you react to her doing stuff that you could wait out. Because the bot is not going to take any actions that will actually hit you without you taking an action yourself, at least not in this form. With just 1 and 3, you, if you are at the correct spacing, must do something to get hit. You can work on hit confirming your strong moves, but this is again not the main focus of it, but you will notice that while she does move forward, it's extremely predictable. And you won't generally need to whiff punish anything in any complex way. It's super easy to whiff punish. So, let's move on to adding another action. We're going to add action 4 in order to change the range that she can move to. So now you have to worry about her being able to hit you from further away, as well as certain of her moves which have variable frame data depending on where you are standing when you block them. And if you react to them in certain timings, it becomes harder to whiff punish them than to whiff punish the others. The goal here is to not give up on whiff punishing the standing heavy punch, for example, while still being mostly ready to also defend from both a low and a move that can end up being fairly safe when she does it, while getting her in on you. Her crouch heavy punch will get her in, and depending on the spacing you decided to take up, you may not really be able to punish her for it. Obviously it's a bot, so you can do something, but it doesn't necessarily that you should. And her slide, while it is almost always unsafe, there are some ranges where if you expect to be able to do a big punish and try, you would be wrong. Generally, however, she does not hold down back very much, so you're going to get to hit her. The main thing you should therefore watch for is actually to see whether or not you counter hit. Because if you counter hit her on a punish after she does either crouch heavy punch or crouch heavy kick, you were too slow. She got to start another move. It's okay, but it's still not a punish anymore. She would have been able to block. So now you've got all these different things that you need to react to in the basic space. But the key to the kata is not to react. You are supposed to be the one attacking. Whenever you miss, or whenever she takes an action after your attack, that's when you're supposed to be learning something. This also works somewhat if you are using a standard anti-air for an air reset. You get to see what happens when you dash in, but this is probably not as important. Most people would have trained most of that by now. You can use it for this, but we generally suggest Alex Bot for air reset stuff. Understanding what your air resets are. Now the important thing about the crouch heavy punch and why it should generally be part of this is that you are expecting to be able to do something, but the range you want to stand at to whiff punish that move is also the range where if you get it wrong, the move ends up being closest to safe. And since she can often jump out of certain moves you do right after it, and she will almost always do it, if you've timed the inputs correctly, she should generally be jumping right after that move if she goes into action 1. And I believe she does light kick if she goes into the next one. So you can tweak yours to make sure that the timing's right, or to set up a different timing altogether. But in general, if you are getting hit by that move, you should be afraid of something. You shouldn't immediately take an action yourself. One good action you have, though, against Mika is usually to backdash yourself. She does have things that will beat that, but at max range, most of the time, the opponent is thinking about being able to throw you, or being able to hit you with something. You can minimize the damage you take relatively by doing it. So you can do almost this entire kata with just these three inputs. So what do we get out of it if we add the others? Well, if we turn on action 5 as well, you will get to see the problem that occurs because she now can go over your lows. And a lot of the kata is about trying to clip Mika with your lows. The main addition to this obviously is the heavy kick as mentioned, and this move is not safe, but can be charged to be made positive entirely. So, if you actually use the other inputs, many of them involve holding the button. If you hold a heavy kick from the beginning, it will cause Mika to charge that move. You do not need to use this, and some inputs, depending on your timing, may not actually hold it well. But you shouldn't worry too much about that in the kata, because the main thing it's actually helping you with is when it isn't charged. The bot needs it to be charged, which means if you input it, it probably is right. But if you're inputting it just to do the kata, you probably don't need to worry about this. Note again that this is actually going to activate her V-trigger a certain amount of the time. As you can see, her gauges are both normal, and she's able to build up over time. You can use this for meter watching if you really want to, but just don't give her full meter all the time, or you'll constantly be facing particular things. And as you've seen with Action 2, that is just a combo. If you add it, it doesn't tend to affect too much. It doesn't tend to take away too much. So let's switch it so that Action 2 is on instead of Action 5. And what you'll see from here is more stuff with jumping, but mostly she'll just stand still more often in neutral. Sometimes she'll do like the light kick after the crouch heavy punch, and you might have to deal with that. But this is actually making it slightly easier. So if you want it to be slightly easier in terms of focusing on the spacing, you can turn on Action 2 to achieve that. You may, however, of course, take more damage because if you input it correctly, she now has armored moves, she now has combos that follow on from certain things. But fortunately, since she doesn't actually use her main combos out of anything, if you don't turn on Action 5, you don't have to worry too much. She's mostly just going to use it to go over your head occasionally with wingless, or catch you when you think you're going to air to air, or some little thing like that. But generally, this isn't alter the bot in a painful way, and therefore doesn't stress you out in the kata too much. If you really want to just have her stand still a little bit more, you should be fine. And of course, with them all on, she gets one more ability, but it's, again, not really relevant to the kata. It's the bot that is important. So, let's slow down a little bit. In fact, let's actually switch characters. We're going to go over to Kareen, and we're going to turn on all of the inputs. And we're going to do a little bit of very basic autopilot. So if you are the type of person who has anyone to help spot you, or just record yourself doing it, but obviously this may be a little bit different if you are trying to focus on something because you think it's working a particular way or not. You should have an interesting experience with it if you are a twitchy person. If you turn off all of your mental faculties relative to trying to do the kata, and the only thing you're supposed to do is stay still. Don't jump at the bot, and don't generally go for big combos or meaties. The only thing you care about here is probably try to play neutral. Act as if you're playing footsies. And stop thinking. You can use this to observe the sort of thing that you get beat up by, the sort of ideas you have about how to play the game and how to play neutral. And the responses you have that are your natural punishes for certain things. A lot of the time, doing just this will let you understand, oh, I stand at the wrong range a lot of the time, or that you don't understand your spacing of your buttons, for example. Similarly, you can see whether or not your anti-airs are effective at particular ranges or not. This is super important, and Zangief is less likely to make this come up. So you get to see yourself moving around, trying to get certain situations set up against an opponent who's intended to make you feel twitchy, to put you in something akin to a vortex, even if not so much. And you can watch back in whatever you've used to do it. If you are a PlayStation player, you obviously can just use basic video capture and see when did you counter hit, when did you get hit by things that you didn't expect, when did you move when it wasn't yet time to move. Those sorts of things come up quite often. If you let yourself play neutral with your EX meter, depending on your character of course, you might find that you use EX moves simply because your opponent is far away, and if you look back at it, you should be able to see, oh, that wouldn't have worked on someone who was actually ready to block. My timing was off. I wasn't quick enough that I would actually have caught them with that. In a real match, you have far too much to think about generally to do this, and the situation doesn't necessarily repeat itself often enough, but katas are all about repeating. So you get a lot of opportunity to see, this is the thing I should have been doing here, this is the thing I do all the time but probably shouldn't be doing here. This anti-air works at this range, this cross-up happens here. Mika is also a very good character for this because of her high variability in attack vectors. And her tendency to move forward and have some normals that reach pretty far, even though it's relatively deceptive about how far they're reaching most of the time. As you can see, we're using V-Trigger 1 at the moment. But if you decided, oh, well, we've got this mostly, and you change her to V-Trigger 2, different things happen. Because V-Trigger 1 is mostly about timing, but because of the way we have it set up, Nadeshiko only tends to come from one or two directions. And she doesn't have a lot of variation in how long she takes to appear. She's not too easy to keep your mind on, but after a little while you start to get used to it and realize, oh, this pressure comes from this direction, this pressure comes from this direction. It's a little bit of Mika matchup stuff, but if you already have Mika matchup knowledge, you don't tend to get very much out of her being in V-Trigger 1. So we're going to turn on her V-Trigger 2 instead, and then just let her beat up for a little bit. No responses at all. What we're looking for is the mix-ups that she gets and the things you have to pay attention to, because the delay in her second version of it. Oh, but we need to turn on her V-Trigger also for this, because this is just demonstration. Normally the bot will not have the V-Trigger meter at full to use, but we need to turn it on for this one. When she activates the Nadeshiko in this form, there is a delay, and that delay makes it difficult for you to decide whether or not you should take any actions against her. But more importantly, it allows her to jump over your head, as been demonstrated a bit so far. She can jump over your head and leave you to deal with Nadeshiko, because Nadeshiko will continue to come from the same side that Mika was on when she called. She can also get much more use out of her armored moves, because now she can just go straight into armor, knowing that her armor will be covered by Nadeshiko's attack. There's no specific reason to do this in a real match, obviously, but it does change your mental space for seeing certain moves. Basically, once Mika does certain things, you are feeling as if you need to block because she's called Nadeshiko. But you both have to think about, okay, which direction should I block? And you're worried about whether or not she's going to do a move or armor or something else that can set up a situation for her while you are on defense. Because she actually can just dash up to you and throw you before Nadeshiko arrives. Not in this particular bot, but the character can do it. Understanding your options in this situation is also not specifically part of the kata. You can add it in, but just don't spend too much time on it, because the main reason why she is useful in V-Trigger 2 for the kata itself is because if you are trying to get up to this character to hit her with your lows, because her defense is relatively good actually, you are continually moving forward, but then she calls a character that leaves you wondering, where do I want to be? Do I need to dash away from this? Do I have time to dash away from this? Did I react quickly enough that I'll be fine? What move is Mika going to do? Can she catch me out of my backdash? Can she catch me if I'm just walking backward? Can she walk up to me? She gets to not actually activate proximity block the way Laura can, but to give you the same mental feeling, to bring up the same space in your mind that something is about to happen that you want to defend from. But in a normal situation, aside from like basically Bison and one or two ways that Akuma can do things, for the most part, when someone is attacking you, you know where they are, and you don't have to worry about any other particular form of the mix-up. It is basically high-low or left-right, and you can see it, whether or not you react in time or whether or not they find some ambiguous way to make you miserable. It's totally different from the mix-up of how do I react to the thing that has just started to happen, because my opponent is not locked down by the fact that they've just attempted to do this. And if you decide, well, okay, I'm going to take an action on reaction to Mika activating the V-Trigger, she can go into the armor quickly enough that most people can't actually respond. Plus, she will, as noted, usually jump after activating Nadeshiko, so, well, at least half the time she should jump. So there are a lot of responses that we would otherwise have that don't work that well. If you're twitchy, therefore, you are in a space where you are trying to get to hit her legs. Most moves that hit the opponent's legs are only one hit. She is putting up a wall of normals in front of her, and on top of that, if she happens to call Nadeshiko before you get into position, you are in a mix-up, unlike nearly any other mix-up in the game. Now, it would be easy to just hit more buttons, but as mentioned, if you're recording this and seeing yourself, our strong suggestion is that you learn to not hit more buttons. The reason is that once she does get to you, in any real match, any opponent that sees this situation is going to go for their fastest move in the scramble. The bot won't do it. But Mika absolutely will. So let's try moving to the most basic part of the bot. Land a low, possibly hit confirm into a combo. If your low is blocked, backdash and get away. Your low is probably not going to be blocked. Mika does not spend a lot of time blocking things. But the action of trying to get into the spacing for the low is the important thing. You don't generally need to worry too much about it. She'll generally reposition herself enough that you probably don't care. Because she'll do things like the wingless if she has all of her actions on. So she'll occasionally just fly over your head and you don't have to worry about it. And punishing her is fine as well. You might want to not dash up after the punish if you want to make it a little bit harder on yourself, but it's no big deal. Since she will tend to move forward, it's unlikely that you'll miss the low too much. However, you might get hit while trying to do it. And since trying to get into range for the low generally puts you in a place where Mika gets a ton of weird options, take throws, heavy punch, all sorts of things. If Mika acts before you do, you're probably going to get hit. So consider it basic footsies. Once she has moved away from you, do your best to get in, hit her with a low, probably hit confirm that low. Once again, note though that if you are getting a counter hit when you hit her after her crouch heavy punch, you probably are not fast enough. In fact, that is part of the match, but it's the hardest part, so we'll get back to that later. For now, we're going to show off a different concept. We're just going to down back to demonstrate to players why exactly this bot functions in that particular way. If you just hold down back, you have to at least pay attention, because if she gets close enough, you'll get thrown. But you can't just hold back either, because weird things will happen. As you can see, she will not only get almost all of the space on the screen and corner you, which is exactly what Mika always wants. Depending on her rhythm, holding back alone with Nadeshko, and I don't mean with, like, just this regular setup, with V-Trigger 1 as well, you will end up in some weird situations. Plus, you've lost all your offense. That's literally the opposite of the point. But her crouch heavy punch into throw stuff, her slightly moving forward constantly and then doing regular throws, all of these things have a high chance of catching you if you decide, I'm just blocking. I'm just blocking and I'm not even guarding my legs because I don't fear your lows for some reason. So let's just observe her for a bit. And I'll point out some of the minor things that she does that make the kata harder. Obviously, she does slide. And you do have to guard your legs at least a little bit. She can flip over your head. Flipping over your head is probably not an issue, but once she lands, she might throw you. That's kind of the point of the first input. And depending on the timing, therefore, you can't actually defend by just not doing anything. It's the character who is intended to teach you that an empty jump is still a terrifying thing if you aren't ready to tech the throw. However, you can't just wait for the empty jump and then tech the throw either. She will jump with the tap buttons sometimes. And she will also sometimes do other buttons when she lands rather than throwing you. Not often, but she does do it. As you just see there, jump, crouch, light kick, jump, do nothing, jump, stand a little further away and then go into a combo. All these little things teach you that you can't just defend. But there are timings when it would be good to do so, just to get yourself back in the game. So you have an opponent who is constantly changing their spacing, who you need to find a way to hit. And we're going with the lows, not because Mika is really susceptible to lows, but because most of us need to play footsies by trying to get into range for lows. If this is not true for you, this is probably still useful bot. But it wasn't a thing you could successfully do with Zangief because he had too much range in front of him and too many chances that he was going to grab you when you tried. So he wouldn't have been a good bot to train this against in a kata. Mika is the best for this. Because she has armor, and that armor doesn't hurt you, so you get to confirm the fact that, oh, I did this at the wrong timing, at the wrong spacing. I shouldn't have gone for that right then because my opponent was at advantage. My opponent was too ready. They weren't dancing around. They weren't recovering from a different move, which is not necessarily an easy thing to get your whiff punishes and your lows from, but at higher levels it's kind of important to at least understand how it works. Especially in terms of the range that you stand at to try, this is important. You then get to understand when you have the option to whiff punish at all, which moves you can whiff punish while dancing around in neutral trying to get the low, and what your opponent's options against those things are. You can of course also get some punish practice in, basic stuff, but overall, you're looking at as many places on the screen as possible. She's attempting to be distracting. And V-Trigger 2 makes her more distracting, which is why it's useful. Again, she will generally not block. You won't have that feeling of, I'm hitting buttons and nothing is happening. You get to confirm it all the time. We actually suggest that you don't spend too much time at a time training with this kata, because it might build up some bad habits toward confirming your button all the time, because she basically never blocks. Mentally, therefore, you shouldn't be spending too much time focusing on whether or not you confirm the combo, but rather simply getting into position to start it. Depending on your character though, you can try buffering or learning to confirm certain things based on the fact that your button whiffed. She generally shouldn't be a character against whom you whiff too often, but you should be trying to hit from the max range anyway, otherwise she might hit you first. And those few times she does block, it feels a lot more meaningful because you understand that, oh, I didn't really have the timing for that. Since she also has an extremely weird amount of movement in her stance, it's hard to tell exactly where you should be standing and when she's doing certain moves to do anything other than an actual whiff punish. You know you can hit this button because she stuck her hand out this far, but learning exactly where Mika's leg is after she whiffs the button to hit her with the low is a little harder. This is partially why we have generally suggested that you use lows, or at least attacks with low hitboxes, because they interact with Mika's hurt boxes in useful ways, in that they miss. They are not useful for whiff punishing her heavy punch, which is the opposite of what we were doing with Zangief. You were trying to use high hitboxes to whiff punish his heavy punch. Here we want to take that part out of the equation, so our suggestion is use lows to do this. So, let's switch back to Cammy. And you can recognize that you can use this to figure out the range on buttons that feel different than their actual animations. For fairness, basically, most games don't have the hitboxes actually match the limb in question perfectly. And lows are particularly susceptible to this. We're going to turn off Mika's actions for a bit and just demonstrate that you can get to a point where it looks like Cammy's foot should be hitting, but is not. A dummy will do, I believe, yes. Fortunately, even though this is fairly unintuitive to some people, you can tell from Mika's stance at least that it's not too weird. If you're familiar with martial arts, you could recognize, well, I'm probably not going to throw off your stance. I'm not really going to do damage if I barely clip your ankle with the tip of my foot. This is particularly a problem for crouch medium buttons because the way that crouch medium button is normally animated is a full leg extension. But punches, crouching punches generally hit the way they look like they'll hit, and sweeps often hit the way they look like they'll hit. But crouch medium is a little weird. But Mika is also useful because, as you can see, if you leave Mika alone for long enough, she changes stance entirely. In order to make this work, we'll have to turn off her blocking because she comes back into regular stance after she blocks. But, as a general thing, she will change her stance, and you then have to wonder, wait, what was I doing? It still obviously appears that you don't actually hit, even though her leg is there. But again, if you really did this in martial arts, most people will agree that this is not that likely to be useful. Hitting someone's ankle with the tip of your foot might stagger them a tiny bit, but it's not going to do any damage the way that damage is done. So, in terms of spacing yourself to get your combos or to get your lows or open up your opponent as a generality, you generally have to dance around a little bit and try to avoid their attacks. But the range where Kami is standing now, you get the feeling of, okay, I am safe here, I can avoid all my opponent's attacks here. But can you hit anything yourself? In fact, if you hit stand medium kick from here, Now, if Mika were to hit her heavy punch, and with it, that stand medium kick would in fact hit her. Because again, high hitbox, hurt boxes with punishes interactions, but the low will not. The low will go underneath it, which is the point. We can demonstrate this by going back to turning on just action 3, I believe. Yes. And demonstrating just the interactions you get and the difference in interactions you get. This may take a little while because whiff punishing is an imprecise science, basically. And it's very hard to actually see it happen in real time very quickly. However, Mika should generally, and this is useful for those of you who want to learn to parry various things, if just action 2 is on, you should be able to figure out your whiff punishes because Mika will take the same 3 actions almost all the time if the bot is input correctly. Crouch light, crouch medium, stand heavy. Occasionally she will go straight from crouch light into stand heavy, but basically you should know what to watch out for. And using just your low and your standing medium kicks, you get to feel out the situation you're in. But because Mika constantly moves forward, and her hitboxes are really good at doing sort of whiff punishing things herself, it's extremely unnerving to actually do. Like, to set out to whiff punish Mika's stand heavy punch from fairly far away is really hard. And the fact that she often activates your proximity block while you're trying to get away from her makes it even harder. But you do have the opportunity to do the whiff punish, and since Mika's hurt bosses tend not to stay out as long as most other characters relative to when her moves finish. It's a little bit difficult to do, and again, making her useful for it. But if you're at the maximum range to whiff punish with the medium kick standing, chances are you will get nothing off the medium kick crouching. Fortunately, she does move forward enough that you might get it. But overall, you should generally expect that it's going to be a complex situation. And even if she didn't, chances are that you probably did the wrong thing. She can whiff punish you fairly easily. She's a strong whiff punish character compared to many. Her light kick has a high-ish hitbox and goes out fairly far. Her medium punch, crouching medium punch, that little headbutt, actually has a really large hitbox in front of it. She's really deceptive. She's super good at whiff punishing and at stopping people from doing things. Possibly why Fudo plays her so well. You should just generally expect that she's going to do things in front of you and then take advantage of the fact that you tried to take an action. So mentally, there's a lot more effort involved in making sure that this works out. And we decided to simply increase the effort even more by making you have to actually use your nose for it. Now, generally, you should understand that for most of the time, you should be backdashing away from her and then trying to get your space back. Because you do have to spend a lot of time backdashing against this character. And that should generally be enough to show you how often you are going to miss it and when you can get it right. And again, note that if you get a counter hit, it's probably that you did not do it right because it's not whiff punishing anything. Granted, the whiff punish is much harder. So on the low, you shouldn't worry as much if you get counter hits, but depending on what move she did before you tried, it might matter. But you see it demonstrated that it's kind of hard to actually clip her after a bunch of things, whereas she's much more likely to clip you. And keeping up your own defense in a walk back footsie style situation to maintain that very specific space, she will constantly make you twitchy and make you feel as if you can't maintain the space you like, even though she doesn't get to just walk forward, she also gets to do moves. And even though you're thinking, well, okay, fine, she's doing moves, I'll whiff punish those moves. That doesn't always work. Eventually you get so focused on, did I hit, that you can't tell whether or not you should actually confirm your stuff. So if you really want to use this for hit confirms in footsies, please recognize that you should be trying to backdash out and respace yourself as if you're playing proper footsies like this. And if you aren't confident that you can make yourself do that, you know, spend some time on just Action 3 to find max range stuff for this reason. See whether or not you're confirming too often, because for Action 3 she will actually block. She won't block that much, but she will block. So once you've got it into your head, okay, I have to hit confirm properly, then you can turn on the other actions and see some stuff. But we're going to switch to a character who is absolutely specialized in exactly this sort of whiff punishing and gets a lot of it. Juri's job is to clip in neutral and convert into big damage. So for Juri, this is probably a heavy part of her game plan. It's difficult for her to do, and you tend to need a lot of practice on it, but it's relatively required if you are going to be taking on Mika. You can see that Juri's necessity for this is considerably higher. And even just with action 3, her difficulty in actually landing the low into things is much higher than trying to hit other stuff. She has other good options in neutral. So this is not Juri sucks at this or Juri sucks in general, but the specific thing that we're referring to, the crouching medium kick into stuff, it's not one of her strongest footsie buttons against Mika. For many characters, obviously, it would be easier to use their zoning tools. But, again, not the point of the kata. If you find yourself, like, automatically throwing fireballs in neutral because of the range, it's good, but not the bot you're intended to do this on. You can use that on Zangief to some extent. He will actually at least dodge them. Or armor through them, but Mika not so much. Mika is for people who need to play footsies, who need to confirm off crouch, medium, and neutral. People who need to backdash out of stuff and then realize what they've done after the backdash and realize where their opponent is, even though their opponent could be moving. So all of that goes along with this, and then you still have the anti-air. The amount of focus it takes to do just this for many people getting into Street Fighter is so high that you really can't concentrate on much else. And since Mika constantly shifts her spacing on the screen, you'll spend a lot more time focusing on, okay, how do I shift my spacing relative to her spacing so I can hit her? And then you realize, oh wait, she jumped. Now in terms of general flow, in terms of general options, your character may have many options to deal with this situation better against Mika. They may have options to deal with it against most of the cast, but there's occasionally one character who puts you in the situation we are attempting to recreate using Mika. And for them, you have to learn how to handle this. We also consider Rashid. He's pretty good at this. But Rashid, at least you can tech his throws if he decides to dash up or run or whatever else. You might be surprised just how much time you spend actually just doing punishes because you never manage to get to the point of hitting with the low. You can actually consider it to be that when you find yourself doing too many punishes on this bot, because it really doesn't actually move forward in a punishable way that often. If you find yourself mostly doing punishes, you're probably not doing well enough at the kata yet. Because it means that you were spending too much time standing still in neutral, giving Mika time to get close to you. Again, she does move forward. There are entire periods of time where she will move forward consistently for like 4 seconds. But she doesn't move forward all the time, especially not if all of the inputs are on. But it is those key moments where she does stop moving forward that you are supposed to take advantage of to move in on her. This is where the dashing part from Zangief can come back in. Once you have gotten used to the idea of standing this far away to try to land this low, you were probably also inching backward because she continually advances. When you realize that she takes an action that does not bring her forward, you're often in a position where you should dash back in yourself after inching back all that time and try to take advantage of it. The windows for this, depending on how you recorded the bot, but most of the time the windows for this are really short. More importantly, as long as you keep on twitching backwards slowly on reaction to her moving forward, you will eventually put yourself in a position where her jump-in becomes strong. Depending on what your anti-air is, you may still be able to deal with her fairly easily, but a lot of people who need to anti-air with buttons will have inched themselves back to a space where their anti-air no longer is as effective, where she might have some options to trick you. So by constantly moving forward, she's supposed to make you feel as if you can't stand where you are. You can't just crouch block where you are. You have to constantly move back. But the moment you move back in a timing where she did not move forward, it has changed almost all of your timings and spacings. This is not really something that you can get away from in this sort of game. So you have to learn to react differently. You need to learn to recognize, oh, this situation has happened, so I should probably anti-air with a different button. I should dash out of the way if I don't feel I can anti-air properly. I should dash up because she went for armor or something and it's an opening for me to do something. I should be able to do this move here, this armored move here, any number of things. Be ready to parry, be ready to dash up throw. All of these little parts of it become harder simply because you're constantly in that feeling of, let me walk slightly away from this advancing wall of normals. So it's a key that you must understand all aspects of this kata, otherwise you're likely to do it a little half-heartedly. It would be easy to hit her where she approached most of the time, with just waiting in one spot and hitting your crouch medium kick. And most of the time it'll either interrupt her or she'll clip you with something that is not that big a deal. She doesn't do the moves that would punish you for doing that so much. But the idea is to mentally space yourself as close to perfectly as possible. You're supposed to let yourself have that reaction of, I need to play footsies by inching away from her, and then still react to everything else she does. What you choose to whiff punish may be based on your character, so we gave her a lot of different types of move with different hurt boxes that stay out so that you can decide which one you want to focus on, or if you want to try to learn them all. It's a lot to take in, but you probably could learn quite a lot of the things you could whiff punish and which of your buttons are good for whiff punishing as a generality and which are situational. If you really want to give yourself hard work, you might want to try taking her throws after certain things, but again, she's not going to be too threatening. She generally shouldn't do much after her crouch. Heavy punch, for example, she should jump over your head or throw you, basically. I think she gets the ability to do the light kick, but I'm not sure which light kick. I can't assure you that she will do the light kick. It depends too much on how you input the bot. So different people will have slightly different things and to worry about different things. Since her armor does not lead into a move automatically, you do get to walk up throw, you get to dash up throw, and so on. And similar to our last release MikaBot, the length of your combo or the difficulty of your combo, or combos if you want to try more than one, can also increase this. Depending on the type of person you are, it might be more difficult to confirm into your combos if your mind is heavily focused on other things. But it is that mobility that you must keep your mind on, and that mobility that will make the stress level of this bot higher than Zangief. If you found that Kata 31 has become easy, well, Kata 32 is here to take over. That's actually all there is to say on it. You can find the bot that you need to input for this at 2-mk.org/bots. It is the MikaBot 1.0. Don't worry too much about what actually, if you need to reference the video to see generally what she should be doing, and if she ends up doing this basically, maybe you don't have to worry too much about how your inputs come out. Certain plinks get weird, certain timings get weird, but if she's doing mostly the correct thing here, you're probably fine. Again, we suggest V-Trigger 2 to make you even more twitchy. But if you find that you're the type who walks away a lot, you might want to use V-Trigger 1 simply because it helps a bit at that point. And just to verify before we end the stream, we're going to switch to Mika to demonstrate that this actually does work in the Mika mirror, and you don't have to worry about the fact that the characters have similar hit and hurt boxes, because the moves that Mika uses to whiff punish another Mika are really not related at all. It's not as if you whiff punish a move with the same move, which would normally be the case for most characters. If you could do it perfectly, you normally would be able to do this well because the hurt box and hit box would always interact properly, so to speak. This works very well when the character has a very linear, direct attack right in front of them. So a heavy punch going straight forward leaves out a hurt box that is punished by obviously another heavy punch. It's the same height, takes up the same space. The mirror match, that's normally the case. For Mika, this is true for some of her moves and not others. Which can actually make this feel a little counterintuitive to Mika players, so good luck Mika players. Fortunately, Mika does have, as I said, really good whiff punish buttons, so you don't necessarily have to worry too much about it. Her stand medium punch will whiff punish a ton of things, her crouch medium kick will whiff punish another ton of things, and if you're really confident, her slide will whiff punish practically everything in the game. For grapplers, if you want to really up your game, you can try whiff punishing with command grabs. This is a thing that is extremely high level and super risky, so you generally wouldn't want to do it. But if you were really confident, again, you have these options. Certain characters can whiff punish with regular grab. I am not one of those players who will try this because I've played characters with terrible throw ranges, but the Bison players and the Vega players and the Armikas of the world should recognize that you have some weird options if you really want to push yourself. And once again, if you have a parry, she does do things in a predictable enough rhythm that you might be able to get some parry practice, just getting yourself to relax and parry moves that you know are coming, and then actually try to do something after the parry, in Ryu's case or Akuma's case. Colleen doesn't have to do anything because she just auto parries, but as a generality you still get to do certain parries, and she does do enough lows that for Colleen there is still something to be benefited from here. So let's thank our Mikas for their performance, and this content will be up at Kata32 at 2-mk.org/katas on Sunday around 6 Eastern, probably somewhere between 6 and 7 Eastern, depending on what issues we have with release. And if you want to get a head start on entering the bot, once again, it is at 2-mk.org/bots and is our MikaBot. So, thank you for watching, everyone. Hopefully it's useful to you. And see you next week for all our other content. Street Fighter, Guilty Gear, Dragon Ball Fighters, and so on. This has been Rillian for 2_MK with another This Guidance. Good night.